It is December 1894. A doctor sits in a room full of strangers. He is not a man given to fantasy. He is not a man given to hope. He is a physician, a scientist, a founder of a psychical research society. A man who has spent years trying to catch mediums in the act of fraud. He has come to this séance in London, Ontario, to observe, to test, to remain unmoved. He has told no one his name. He has told no one who he is. He has told no one who he has lost. And then a form appears in the doorway of the cabinet. An elderly woman, silvery white hair, slightly bent, a shawl around her shoulders. And the room goes very quiet, because this woman is walking toward him. She stops, a few inches from his face. He can see individual hairs hanging across her temple. He can see her eyes, moving, looking into his. He tests himself, right there, in that moment. He stands completely still and asks himself, am I dreaming? Am I hypnotized? Am I seeing what I think I'm seeing? And then the form says, my dear boy, do you recognize me? Tonight, we're going to look at a case that has occupied psychical researchers for over 100 years. It comes from a book called Dawn of the Awakened Mind, published in 1920 by Dr. John S. King, a physician and the founding president of the Canadian Society for Psychical Research. The book documents over 20 years of careful, meticulous, skeptical investigation into whether consciousness survives death. It contains dozens of cases, but tonight, we're going to focus on a few that even hardened skeptics have struggled to explain. We'll go slowly, we'll look at the evidence carefully, and by the end, I hope you feel something that you haven't felt in a while. Welcome to Whispers of Hope. Before we get to the evidence, you need to understand who is telling this story, because the messenger matters. Dr. John S. King was not a believer. He was a physician, trained in science, trained in skepticism, trained to find the mundane explanation before entertaining any other. He founded the Canadian Society for Psychical Research specifically to investigate mediums. He attended séances with one primary purpose: to find the fraud. He personally inspected cabinets. He hammered nails into windows to prevent secret passages. He checked walls, floors, ceilings. He recorded everything in writing immediately after each sitting, from notes taken during the séance itself. This is not a credulous man's testimony. And he begins his record with the night in December 1894 when everything changed. The séance is held at the home of a Mr. McRoberts, chairman of the London School Board. The medium is a woman named Mrs. Effie Moss. King has never met her. He has never sat with her before. The other sitters, roughly a dozen people, are members of the London Spiritual Society. King knows none of them. None of them know him. He has given no name, no profession, no personal information of any kind. He sits in the horseshoe of chairs before the cabinet, and he waits. Several forms appear from the cabinet that evening. A minister in black, an actress from Brooklyn, a brother. King watches. He is polite, he is careful, he is unmoved. And then, an elderly woman appears, slightly bent, silvery white hair, an old-fashioned shawl around her shoulders. And from across the room several people say to him quietly, "You are wanted." He rises, he approaches, and as he draws close enough that his face is only inches from hers, he can see something no stranger should be wearing. She has thin silk gloves on her hands, gloves that appear 1 or 2 sizes too large. And King stops, because he knows exactly why a woman would wear gloves like that. His mother had spent many years carrying the evidence of rheumatic arthritis in the lower 2 rows of the joints on both hands. The joints were enlarged and swollen. She used to call them, quietly, privately, her hickory nut joints. And because of those joints, she had a lifelong habit. Whenever she had company, whenever she went out, she would put on thin silk gloves, always a size or two too large, to make the joints less noticeable. And around her shoulders on cold days, she wore an old-fashioned comforter shawl to keep off the drafts. This was not the sort of thing that appears in a newspaper. This was not the sort of detail a stranger could guess. This was intimate, domestic, the private habit of a woman in her own home, the kind of thing only someone who had lived with her would ever have known. And King later said, the exact duplications of the old-fashioned silk gloves and shawl were worn by this manifestation, apparently as real as I had ever seen them. King looks at the form before him, and he says nothing. He gives nothing away. He simply says, "Who is this?" And the form steps forward, in the way his mother always stepped forward, in the characteristic way of her, and says, "My dear boy, do you recognize me?" And then she says, "Yes, I am still alive, and am pleased to see you here, and I bring you proof of my existence." King writes that when the form appeared, he beheld the form and features, the perfect physical resemblance and physiognomy of my own mother. She patted him on the cheek, she kissed him, and then she told him something that no one in that room could have known. She said, "Your pa is here with me. He only recently came to me out of the body. He was extremely weak. He cannot yet gather the forces necessary to appear, but he will do so at another séance, if you remain." King's father had died approximately 2 months before this sitting. 2 months, not years ago, not long ago. 2 months, and King had told no one, not McRoberts, not Mrs. Moss, not a single person in that room. He would later write, "I was a stranger to them all, as well as to the medium, and therefore all were ignorant of the dates of death of my mother and father, and of any other data concerning them." Before the form withdrew, King and several other sitters did something remarkable. They examined the figure, not at a distance. They looked closely, and they found a brown spot on the white of the globe of the left eye, a cluster of silvery hair hanging over the left temple from the upper part of the forehead down to the left ear, and the hickory nut joints, confirmed by touch. These features, King wrote carefully, had in my mother's lifetime been examined and commented upon by those who knew her. They were specific, they were verifiable, and they were confirmed not by King alone, but by inspection by more than half the sitters present. Then the form did something his mother had always done. She gave him a parting kiss. She said goodbye in precisely the way his mother always said goodbye, and then she was gone. King writes, "As the manifestation was about to go, it gave me a parting kiss, and said goodbye in a precisely similar manner to that which my mother always adopted when we parted with each other during her physical existence." The utterances were those peculiarly characteristic of my mother, and such as no other human being could imitate or know and use them. King stood there in that room in a house in London, Ontario, full of strangers who did not know his name, and he tested himself. He is clear about this. He genuinely asked himself, "Am I hallucinating? Is this a dream? Have I been hypnotized somehow?" And then he looked around the room, because the other sitters had seen it too, heard it too, touched those hands too. the hickory nut joints confirmed by touch by more than half the sitters present. Collective hallucination, he reasoned, would be far harder to accept than the evidence before him. King stayed in Ontario. A few evenings later, he returned to his sitting. He had been promised his father would try to appear. He waited quietly, thinking to himself about what test he could apply. Then he saw it. A form in a seated position, or rather trying to rise from a seated position. Slowly, unsteadily, hands reaching upward, backs facing outward, and King felt his chest tighten, because that was exactly how his father had been in the last months of his life. His father had suffered a severe injury nearly a year and a half before his death. Combined with heart disease at 80 years of age, the injury had left him weak and tremulous. He needed help to rise. He would reach out with his hands, backs upward, when someone offered to assist him. The form extended those hands to King, and King took them. He wrote later, his hands were plump and fat, and when the fingers were extended, there were depressions or dimples opposite the knuckles, and his hands felt soft to the touch. He described it as the most familiar sensation in the world, the grip of his father's hands. And then, in the presence and hearing of all the sitters, King asked, "Who is it?" And the response came, loud and distinct, "I am your father, Stephen King." King turned to those present. He said, "Friends, did you hear what he said?" And several replied, "Yes, he said he was your father, Stephen King." And then the form spoke. It said, "I still live, and am able to bring to you proof of my continued existence. I found your mother awaiting me on my awakening into spirit life, and there are many of our relatives and friends there who have gone over before us. We are always near you and try to use our influence with you." And then it said one more thing. Something small, something private, something that would have meant absolutely nothing to any other person in that room. It said, "Tell Robbie that Grandpa still lives." Robbie, King's father's favorite grandson. A private pet name, a private relationship, offered freely, without prompting, to a room full of strangers who would not have known what it meant. And then the form began to dissolve. Before the eyes of everyone present, this solid material figure that had spoken in a voice they all heard, with hands they had touched, dissolved into the carpet. It did not retreat into the cabinet, did not step backward, did not disappear behind a curtain. It dissolved downward into the floor in full view of 27 people. Whatever explanation you give the appearance, the manner of the disappearance demands an explanation too. King would write, "I would ask the reader, what hypothesis best accounts for the facts related in the preceding record? Can fraud substitute a duplicate, dead or alive, of the reader's father in every feature, whether physical, mental or moral, natural or artificial, with endowments, knowledge, habits and desires that would command your recognition and acceptance by your senses, your life's knowledge of him, and the exercise of your reason? I leave you to accept the substitute, or to prefer the original. I am forced to adopt the evidence as proving the original." If you have lost someone, if you have sat with the silence they left behind and asked the question that has no obvious answer, "Will I see them again?" I want to offer you this. King's mother died in 1886, falling down the cellar stairs, striking her head on the stone wall, gone before morning. And she came back, with her hands in oversized gloves, to show her son the proof he needed. She didn't come back broken or frightened. She came back herself, kissing him on the cheek the way she always had, saying goodbye the way she always said goodbye. And King's father, who had only died 2 months before, came back, identified himself by name, and said, "I still live, and am able to bring to you proof of my continued existence." Then he said something that I want you to sit with for a moment, something that speaks to the question so many people carry after losing someone, not only where they go, but whether the people we have lost are together again. He said, "I found your mother awaiting me on my awakening into spirit life." She was there when King's father opened his eyes on the other side of death, still weak, still finding his feet in whatever world he had entered. His wife was already there, waiting for him. The woman who had been gone from this world all that time. She had not disappeared. She had simply gone ahead, and now they were together again. And then he said more. He said, "There are many of our relatives and friends there who have gone over before us." Many, not a few, not traces, not faint impressions of the people he had loved. Many, the whole gathering of a lifetime, all of them still there. And then he said the line that I think matters most of all. "We are always near you and try to use our influence with you." The evidence from King's father, spoken aloud, heard by multiple witnesses, recorded in the moment, suggests that whatever waits beyond death is not an empty room, it is a reunion. King was careful never to overstate what he believed. He was a scientist. He knew the limits of evidence. But over 20 years of investigation, attending hundreds of sittings with dozens of mediums in multiple countries, he reached a conclusion. I am forced to adopt the evidence as proving the original. Not a copy, not a trick, not a hallucination, the original. 20 years of tests, 20 years of checking, 20 years of trying to catch the fraud. And what he found in the end was not a fraud. It was his mother in her gloves, still trying to reach him. If this video has given you something you needed today, please share it with someone who might be searching for the same thing. This channel exists for people in grief, for people who need evidence, for people who need to know that the question, "Are they still there?" is not a foolish question. It's the most important question there is. And the evidence, from people like Dr. John S. King, a physician and a skeptic who spent 20 years trying to disprove it, suggests the answer is yes. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.